April 1944. The skies above the Reich were no longer a sanctuary. Allied bombers, 1,000 strong, were pounding German industry into dust. But deep within the Luftwaffe's hangars, a weapon of last resort was taking shape. One so revolutionary, it promised to sweep the enemy from the air with the raw force of technology. The Messerschmitt Me-262 Schwalbe, the Swallow. It was the world's first operational jet fighter. It could reach nearly 540 miles per hour, almost 120 miles an hour faster than the fastest Allied piston fighter. For the exhausted German pilots, it wasn't just a plane. It was a ghost of a chance. But this ghost had a fatal, self-inflicted wound. This is the story of how the world's most advanced aircraft became a strategic disaster, doomed not by enemy fire, but by its own flawed heart and the crippling interference of a desperate dictator. When it finally roared into battle, Allied pilots reported they weren't fighting an airplane. They were fighting a shadow. A formation of B-17s, the seemingly unstoppable flying fortresses, watched in horror as the 262 tore through their defensive fire, its 4 formidable 30mm cannons ripping apart bombers in seconds. Its appearance alone shattered the confidence of the Allied air crews. This was the most feared aircraft of the war, a technological marvel that could change the war overnight. The German design represented a conceptual leap, the end of propeller warfare. But the story of the Me-262 is not a testament to German ingenuity. It's a tragic case study in political blindness and catastrophic engineering failure. The jet that promised to save the Reich was ultimately doomed not by enemy guns, but by its own flawed heart. The twin-engined monster that shredded bomber formations was crippled by the very technology that made it so lethal. The core of the disaster was the Jumo 004 engine. We must understand exactly why this innovative engine was also an executioner for its own pilots. The Jumo 004 was an axial-flow turbojet, a design superior in theory because it allowed for a sleeker profile and incredible speed. But its construction was compromised from the start. Germany, facing a severe resource crunch, lacked the vital high-temperature alloys, nickel and chromium, that were essential for durable turbine blades. Allied engines, like the later British Derwent, relied on robust, heat-resistant metal. Germany had to substitute. They used cheaper, less durable steel, forcing the engineers to design an air cooling system so complex it added massive weight and mechanical complexity. The consequence? A catastrophic lifespan. The Jumo 004 was officially rated for just 50 hours of operation, but in reality, many failed after only 10 to 25 hours of punishing service. Every takeoff was a lottery, every landing a gamble. Imagine the terror. You're flying the fastest machine ever built, but at any moment, the jet engine bolted to your wing could simply disintegrate in a plume of fire and shrapnel. But the mechanical failure was compounded by operational fragility. Pilots were instructed to accelerate with almost surgical slowness. A quick throttle movement, the kind a fighter pilot needs for survival, would almost certainly destroy the engine due to a compressor stall or immediate overheating of the delicate turbine blades. This was the fundamental tragic flaw. The Jumo 004 was an engine that could not reliably do its job. It was a 540-mile-per-hour time bomb. As the technical failures mounted, a political one sealed the jet's fate. Adolf Hitler, obsessed with the idea of a miracle weapon, he saw the 262 not as a savior of the Luftwaffe's fighter force, but as a long-range bomber. In late 1943, he issued a directive that the Me-262 would be built primarily as a blitz bomber or high-speed bomber, for use against the Allied invasion fleet. This decision was a moment of utter strategic madness, perhaps the single greatest blunder in the history of German air power. The man who knew better was General Lieutenant Adolf Galland. A legendary ace, the commander of the fighter arm, Galland desperately pleaded with the Führer, arguing that the Reich needed fighter defense, not more futile bombing raids. Galland envisioned a jet shield, hundreds of Tu-62s intercepting the massed bomber streams, halting the Allied destruction of German industry. He knew the jet's power was wasted carrying a single 1,100-pound bomb. Hitler refused, barking, "The bomber must not be touched." This political stubbornness wasted precious, irreplaceable months of production on modifications to turn the purebred fighter into a mediocre, easily intercepted bomber. The delay pushed the jet's mass deployment into late 1944, long after the strategic moment for its success had passed. The jet was ready, but the Führer was not. The pilots who flew the Tu-62, the elite Experten, were caught between this technological promise and the political reality. Men like Walter Novotny, one of the first commanders of a jet unit, Commando Novotny, were tasked with making the impossible work. They were veterans, trained to trust their machines, but the Tu-62 demanded a completely different, almost paranoid level of care. Their accounts are filled with frustration. They had to nurse the fragile Jumo engines through every maneuver. A dogfight, which required violent changes in thrust, became a death sentence. Allied pilots quickly recognized this hesitation. If a Tu-62 had to maneuver sharply, it often meant an engine was about to fail, or the pilot was afraid to push the throttle past its safe limit. Novotny himself, a Knight's Cross recipient, was killed while flying the Tu-62, likely due to engine failure or being caught in the jet trap. His death was a massive blow to the already sinking morale. Every time one of these prized jets exploded on takeoff or landing, it wasn't just a loss of technology. It was the loss of an irreplaceable, highly trained pilot, the very men Galland was trying to save. The bomber diversion created by Hitler didn't just cost time. It cost the lives of the best men the Luftwaffe had left, squandered on a futile mission. By the time the political chains were finally loosened, and the Tu-62 was allowed to assume its intended fighter role in mid-1944, the Allies had already developed a brutal, effective counter-strategy. They knew the jet was invincible in the air, but cripplingly vulnerable on the ground. The Jumo engine's slow acceleration and the aircraft's high landing speed, around 100 miles per hour, meant the Me-262 was helpless during its takeoff and landing phases. The Allies simply waited. P-51 Mustangs and P-47 Thunderbolts, now equipped with long-range drop tanks, patrolled the airfields where the Tu-62s operated, sometimes flying 24-hour cycles. This became known as the jet trap. Allied pilots logged hundreds of kills, not in daring dogfights, but by simply shooting down the jets as they desperately tried to return to base, low on fuel, and with their engines screaming at their limits. The technological gap had been overcome by simple, brutal attrition, capitalizing on the Me-262's fundamental design vulnerability. The genius of the P-51 and P-47 pilots was not fighting the jet, but avoiding it until it was most vulnerable. The tragedy of the Me-262 is the tragedy of a brilliant idea destroyed by incompetence and hubris. It achieved a staggering 5.2-to-1 kill ratio against Allied planes, a testament to its raw design. Despite this incredible combat success, the Luftwaffe failed. Of the nearly 1,430 jets produced, only a fraction ever saw combat. And here is the most damning statistic. Far more Me-262s were lost to engine failure and landing accidents than were shot down by the enemy. The legacy of the Swallow is not its speed, but the haunting question: What if the Jumo engine had been reliable? What if the Reich's leadership had trusted their best fighter pilot, Galland, instead of the erratic vision of the Führer? The Messerschmitt Me-262 remains the greatest military leap that landed flat on its face. A lethal warning that even the most revolutionary technology cannot save a flawed system. The future of air warfare was written in the sleek lines of the Me-262. But the victory belonged to the nation that could build reliable engines. And more importantly, stay out of the way of its own engineers.